So an ominous warning, I should say, excuse me, tonight from the head of the CDC in the wake of the Supreme Court draft opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade. Dr. Rochelle Walensky saying she believes that women may die if they're denied access to abortion services, especially women who do not have the resources to cross state lines if abortion is outlawed in many states. We have a lot to discuss now with CNN's senior political analyst Kirsten Powers and political commentator Alice Stewart, who is a Republican strategist. Good evening to both of you. Thanks for joining once again. Kirsten, I saw something that you tweeted, and I just want to read it. You said, believe it or not, it's possible to believe abortion is wrong and not something you would do, and recognize that reasonable people of good faith disagree and should be allowed to follow their own conscience. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, well, I was addressing the fact that when I came out with my opinions about the leaked decision, I support Roe v. Wade, and I always have. A lot of people were coming at me basically, making religious arguments because I'm Catholic, and so I was addressing this argument that a lot of people make that if you're a Christian, for example, or if you're just a decent human being, you have to see that this is a child that's being murdered and slaughtered and all of the language that they use. And I was trying to make the point that if you think about this in a less binary way and just acknowledge, which people just have such a hard time doing, that people of good faith who have actually spent a lot of time thinking about this issue have come to a different conclusion, and it's made in good faith. You are free to have your opinion about it, but to take your opinion and then impose that religious belief onto other people, it's not okay. And so that was the argument I was making. It's like you're free to believe what you want to believe and live your life that way. But once you start moving into making your religious argument, that anybody who doesn't hold it is somehow some kind of monster, I think you're in some pretty bad territory.
Listen, Alice, I know that you are pro-life. And you say that your entire vote for Trump is vindicated based on the Supreme Court. So what's your response to what Kirsten just said?
Look, I have also been hit from many sides for speaking out my opinion on this very divisive issue. I, like Kirsten, am pro-life, and I happen to believe that I think it's really important to protect the sanctity of the unborn and protect the life of innocent children. There are 63 million reasons why I believe this, because that is the number of abortions that have been conducted since Roe v. Wade was enacted in 1973. And look, these are the people, these unborn babies don't have someone speaking out for them. And I think it's really important that we keep them in mind and someone stand up for them. And look, people have lit their hair on fire with this opinion coming out saying that abortion is going to be banned across the country. That is not true. What this does, this takes this very important issue, takes it out of the hands of 9 unelected justices and puts it in the hands of elected representatives at the state level, closer to the people, where the best decisions are made. And that's important to keep that in mind. Look, Republicans have fought for decades for originalist jurists to the Supreme Court that would adhere to the strict interpretation of the Constitution. That's exactly what Alito did in this opinion, saying that abortion is not specifically addressed in the Constitution. Therefore, Roe v. Wade was incorrect from its very inception. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said just the same when she addressed the law school years ago.
Yeah, go ahead, Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, like the other thing that I said today is like this argument is like peak patriarchy. Okay, it's a self-reinforcing loop that you can never get out of, because the men who wrote the Constitution hundreds of years ago didn't think that the people who they believed were their property, right, that women were their property, that they didn't believe that the people who are their property should have a right to abortion or to, frankly, anything, is irrelevant. We don't look to the history to mimic, people who believed that women and Black people were their property. Okay, we look to our past to learn lessons, and to have Justice Alito, or even to listen to you, Alice, frankly, say that because these people didn't put abortion in the Constitution, that means that there is no right to constitution, it's crazy making, because there's no way to ever get out of that loop, because this idea of even of the tests that he's putting on it, nothing really can pass these tests.
Well, let me just ask you this: there are lots.
We had.
There are other issues that are other issues that are beyond Christianity, where people find sacred, right? And should that, if people wanted to espouse their religious beliefs or put their religious beliefs on the courts or make them legal, Alice, would you be okay with that? There are many religions that don't like meat. Should we ban meat in the United States? I know it's just an example. I know it's not equal, but how far do we take this? It's supposed to be a separation of church and state. And I understand that. I understand your feelings about it, and I accept that. I understand, Kirsten, your feelings about it, and I accept that. But shouldn't there be a separation of church and state? And when you have something like this, shouldn't it be based on what the doctor and the woman thinks is okay rather than on a religious belief? Because part of the reason, a main part of the reason this country was founded is for religious freedom.
What needs to be kept in mind here is the fact that this is about what is written in the Constitution, and this is what the Supreme Court, what this opinion addresses, is that this abortion
Alice,
issue.
I accept that, but did you understand what she just said? There are lots of things that were not written in the Constitution. When the Constitution was written, I wasn't even considered a human being. That's not in the Constitution. Do we go back to that time and say, for a person of color, a black person, that I should not have every right that you have, Alice, as a person under the Constitution in America because it's not originally written in the Constitution?
Look, I think
they didn't say interracial marriage was okay. I mean, and then the Supreme Court said that it was. So
and Alice, hold on, and I don't want to beat up on Alice, but also just another point. Under the Constitution, you would not be able to vote. And now you have full right as a man, as a white man. Mostly it was white men who were able to vote. Now you're able to vote as a woman. Should you not be able to vote because it wasn't in the Constitution?
Look, Alito specifically said this opinion deals specifically with the life issue, and all of those other issues. Look, many previous precedents have been overturned. Plessy versus Ferguson is a case in point. Look, Kirsten talking about what is crazy making. What's crazy is we have some states, Virginia, for example, that allows abortion, taking of a life, up to the 3rd trimester. I mean, the baby is almost born, and they're fine with aborting it. Look,
but that's where the country lives, in the middle. It's not the extreme.
Save a woman's right.
I don't think people. Hold on, Kirsten. I'll let you make a point. I think most of the country believes that there should be restrictions on abortions, and if the life of a mother should be included in that it should be allowed. But that's not what's happening here. Go on, Kirsten. Sorry, I'll let you make your point.
The vast majority of abortions happen within the first 8 weeks. So, this is always taking us off into this other kind of part of where it's dealing with like an infinitesimal, like 1% of abortions. So this is not what we should be talking about. I mean, I want to get back to what you said, Alice, and this was the point that I was trying to make with that tweet that Don brought up, was you're speaking in very definitive terms that this is a person, that an embryo is a person, okay? And what I'm saying is there are a lot of people of good faith who do not believe that.
Okay.
Reformed Jews who have spent a lot of time thinking about this issue morally and theologically do not believe that. And so why is that view being imposed on people who do not share that religious view?
I've got to go, Alice, quickly, please.
Look, what I believe and what many pro-life people believe, that life begins at conception, period. And at that point,
great, we don't get an abortion.
And also to the point Don says in terms of making exceptions, I believe there should be exceptions in the case of rape, incest, and life of the mother. So this is not a blanket across the board ban on abortions. There should be exceptions, but in certain cases, but not in all.
We'll continue this conversation. Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll be right
Thank
back.
you.